Hey guys, and welcome to the second video in the React video series. Now in this video we're going to be talking about state management, which is something that you can manage a lot easier using React than you can in just vanilla JavaScript. You can think of state as a set of variables, and those variables might dictate what your website displays. State is also a very useful place where you can store the values of inputs that your users type into. And that's kind of why it's called the state of the application, because it keeps track of how the application should be at any point in time when the user is interacting with it. So here all I did was create a new directory and I named it state management, and I created it by just using the create React app terminal command that we learned about in the last video. So in previous versions of React where they would use class components, state used to be created and managed in something called a constructor inside the class. So in the constructor of the class, you would say what you wanted the initial state to be, and whenever a user took an action on your website, you could change the state by using a function called setState. However, because the new standard is to use functional components, which is the version of React that we're going to be using in this video series, we'll be using a React hook called useState. And this video is going to be all about how to use useState. So here I am inside of my app functional component, and if we go to the browser, we see the starter environment that comes with Create React App. Now the first thing that we're going to do is from React, we're going to import useState. Now for us to create a new state variable inside of our functional component, up here, before the return statement, you can create a new constant, then you'll have square brackets, and we'll just set that equal to useState. So inside of useState, you can set what you want the default value of this variable to be. So in this case, let's say we want to keep track of a number, and we want that number to start at 0. Then first thing we would have to do is we put a 0 inside of useState, so that is the default value, and then whatever we want our state variable to be, we put it inside these square brackets. And now the special thing about the useState hook is that inside these square brackets, you provide two values. The first one is going to be your state variable, and the second one is going to be a function that you're going to use to change the value of that state variable. So here, our state variable is going to be called number value, and our function to change that value is going to be called set number value. So down here in the HTML, let's go ahead and create an h1 that essentially says my value is, and then we'll use squiggly brackets to enter our state variable number value. Now if we go ahead and go back to our browser, we'll see that we have the text my value is and the number 0. And that's because the initial state of number value is set to 0. And that value gets inputted here in our return statement. Now underneath our h1, let's go ahead and create a button. And with this button, let's change the value of number value whenever we click it. So in the previous video series, we talked about event listeners and how we could add an event listener for when you click on something on your website. So in this case, we'll add an onClick event listener to this button element. So right here, I've defined a new function called onClick Increment, which takes in an event as a parameter. And now inside of here is going to be the code that gets run when we click the button. And because this is an increment button, all we want to do is call set number value to change the value of number value inside of our state. But what's the value that we want to change it to? Let's say that we just want to increase that number by 1. So in order to do that, we'll create a new variable, and we'll call it new value, and we'll just set that equal to number value plus 1. And then we call our set number value state function, and we pass in new value. Now the last thing we have to do is we have to hook up this function to the onClick event of this button. So inside of this opening tag of the button element, we can add a prop called onClick, and we can set that equal to our function. Now if we go ahead and save this and we go back to our browser, we'll see that we have my value is 0 and we also have our increment button. And every time that I click the increment button, you see that the value increases by 1. And that's because we specified when you click this button, we want to run this function. And this function essentially says create a new value, which is the old number value plus 1, and then set number value to be that new value. Now that number value has been increased by 1, this element right here displays the new value of number value. And that's essentially how React works with state in a nutshell. The website is essentially reacting to the change of state. Now let's go ahead and add another button, but this time we'll call it Decrement. So this button's job is to actually decrease the value of number value in our state. So we'll create a new function, and this time we'll call it onClick Decrement. And onClick decrement will set the new value equal to the old number value minus 1. And then we'll still set number value to new value, which is this variable. If we go ahead and save this and we go back, we see now we have 2 buttons. And if we hit decrement, then now our state value is decreasing by 1 every time. Now this is a super easy and simple example of how we can use useState to keep track of a variable, and when that variable changes, we see that our website adjusts with it. And we can also use these variables to dynamically show and hide things on our website if we want to. So for example, down here, let's add some JavaScript code in our HTML. If you remember, in order to do that, we have to use squiggly brackets. Now the thing that we want to do is we want to render some text if our number value is ever greater than 6. Now in normal JavaScript, we would use an if statement. But in React, you can use a double and statement, where before the double and is a condition and after the double and is the element that you want to render. So in this case, we're going to say when number value is greater than 6 and we want to render I am greater than 6. Go ahead and save that, and let's go back to the browser, and we see my value is 0. And we can still increment and decrement that value if we want to. But watch very closely as we change this value so that it's greater than 6. As soon as it becomes 7, we notice that this text appears on the screen. And the reason for that is because the value of number value in our state has surpassed the value of 6. Now when number value is 7, we said we want to render this p tag, which says I am greater than 6. And if we go back to the browser and we start decrementing this value, we see once this value is no longer greater than 6, the p tag disappears. Again, this is how the website is able to react to when there are changes in state. And this is just another simple example of how you can have your website dynamically shift when state changes. Now the next example that I want to go over with you guys is probably going to be more common. It's when you have a user input. So underneath all of the code that we've written so far, let's go ahead and add an HR to separate the sections. And down here, let's add just a normal text input. And I've gone ahead and labeled this section onChange because now we're going to use the event listener for onChange for this input. So for this input, let's go ahead and give it a label, and we'll make that label be name. And so just like before, we're going to add a prop inside of our input, but this time instead of onClick, it's going to be onChange. And we're going to set that equal to a function that we're going to define above the return statement. But before we define that function, let's go ahead and create a new state variable. And this time we'll just name our state variable name. And we'll have the function to change that variable to be called setName. And by default, setName is just going to be empty string. Now we can define our onChange function. So here I've created a function called onChangeInput, and onChangeInput is what we're going to call when our input changes down here. So I've essentially set this prop onChange equal to onChangeInput, which is our function. Now inside of here, in order to get the value that's inside the input, we can create a variable called value and set that equal to event.target.value. And that will get the value that's inside of our input. And now if we want to change our name variable, down here we can just call setName and put value inside of it. And now our name variable will be whatever this value is set to, which in this case will be the value inside of our input. So what we can do down here is underneath our input, let's go ahead and create a p tag. And inside of here, we'll say, hi, my name is, and then in squiggly brackets, we'll put our name state variable. Go ahead and save this and go back to our browser. And we see that our text shows up, hi, my name is, and there's no name attached to it. And the reason is because this input doesn't have a value in it. But as soon as I start typing my name in here, we see that that p tag gets updated to fill in whatever is inside this input. Let's go ahead and take this one step even further. Let's say that if our input is empty, then we don't even want to show this p tag. So for example, we could go ahead and do what we did on line 29, create new squiggly brackets, and add a condition before this p tag. In this case, our condition is going to be when our name is not equal to empty string, that is when we want to display this p tag. So if we go back to the browser, you'll see that your name input is empty and our p tag does not display. If we open up our inspector, then you can actually see in our HTML, there is no p tag. But as soon as I start typing in this input, you see that our p tag dynamically creates itself and fills itself with the text as well as the name that we added inside of the text input. And no matter what I type in here, you can see that that p tag is dynamically changing. And once I remove all of the letters from inside my text input, the p tag will disappear again. Let's extend on this example a little bit, and this time we're going to add another button, and we'll have that button label be print. And inside of here, we'll go ahead and add an onClick prop, and we'll set that equal to onClick print. And onClick print is just going to be a new function that we define up here above our return statement. So let's go ahead and create another state variable, and this one's just going to be called printText. And then the function to change it is going to be called setPrintText, and by default it's also just going to be an empty string. So in our onClick print function, we're going to call setPrintText, and in here we're going to change the value of printText. And what we're going to change it to is hello, and then our name state variable. Now up here, let's go ahead and take our printText state variable, and let's add a p tag underneath here that just renders what that variable is. I actually had this as a comma before, but it should be a plus sign. If you go back to the browser and now we click print, we'll see that says hello Beng. And the reason is because it is setting the print text equal to hello, comma, the name variable. But it only does that at the time when you click the onClick print button, which is this button. The distinction is that because we're doing onChange for this text area, whenever this variable changes, this text changes. However, because this button is only an onClick event listener, it only changes after we click the button. So if I click this now, this is going to say hello B, because right now the current value of this state variable is just BE. Now in the last video, we also talked about props. And props are a way for you to pass information from a parent component to a child component. So in this case, let's go ahead and create another component and make it a child of this app.js component. So we'll create a new folder and we'll call it components. And then inside of components, we're going to create our new component and we'll just call it myComponent.jsx. Now inside of here, we're going to create a functional component. So essentially here, we'll just create our new functional component, which is called myComponent, which takes in props. And then this function is just going to return some HTML. In this case, we'll just have it return a div, which contains a p tag. Now let's say that we want to access this name state variable inside of myComponent. Now the way that we could do that is by passing it into props. So in our app component, let's go ahead and import myComponent, and that's going to be from ./components/myComponent, which is our file. And then down here underneath our p tag, let's go ahead and create an HR, and then we'll place myComponent. Now down here, you can see I'm getting this error called attempt import error. And it's saying that's inside of ./components/myComponent. And it's saying that does not contain a default export. If you look inside our app component, we have this export default app at the bottom. So we just need to add that to our new component as well. But instead of exporting app, we're going to export myComponent. Now, like I said, we want to access this name state variable inside of myComponent. So what we can do is we can create a new prop, and we'll just call this myProp. You can name this whatever you want. And then we're going to assign myProp equal to name. And name is going to be the value of this state variable. Now, the next thing that we have to do is we have to go into myComponent. And inside of myComponent, we have to pull out that value from props. Now, if you remember in the last video, we talked about object destructuring. And the way that we can do that is we can do const and then squiggly brackets, and we can pull out the value that we want from that object that's on the right side of the equal sign. So in this case, our object is props, and we want to pull out this attribute called myProp. And that's what this looks like. So now what we can do is we can use this variable inside of this component to do whatever we want. So in this case, let's just have it say happy birthday, and then squiggly brackets, myProp. Go ahead and save that, and what we're essentially doing is we're funneling this value, myProp, from up here into our child component. And up here, we're saying that myProp is going to be assigned to whatever this variable is, which is name. In this case, name is our state variable. And the only time that we change our name is on the onChange input, where we call setName, and that's whenever we change the value inside of our input element on this level. So if we go ahead and go back to our browser, we'll see that our input is empty, and we have this text that says happy birthday. But as soon as I start typing in here, we'll see that the happy birthday also fills in with whatever text is inside my text input. And that's because we were successfully able to pass down the value of the state variable name into our subcomponent. Now, something to keep in mind when you're managing state in React is that you can always pass variables down into child components, but you can't always pass variables up to parent components. This is one of the more challenging things about front-end development, is understanding and knowing what layer and in which component you should store each state. But it's quite possible that you could have other variables, or even some of these variables, in different components. The best rule of thumb is only the state variables that apply to this immediate component as well as all of its children should be at this level. So that's all I have for you guys in this video. Hopefully now you feel more comfortable using the useState React hook to manage your state with React. As always, I'll leave a link in the description so you can access the code from this video. In the next video, we're going to be talking about useEffect and the component lifecycle of React components. Leave a comment down below of the other things you want me to teach in React, and I'll see you guys in the next video.